Let's begin with the Trump transition. The president-elect has announced he wants North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum to run the Department of Interior. Burgum originally challenged Trump for the Republican nomination. Meanwhile, there are new revelations about his pick for Secretary of Defense. Officials in Monterey, California, have confirmed that they looked into sexual assault allegations against Peter Hegseth in 2017. His lawyers tell CBS News that the Army veteran turned Fox News host was already investigated and, quote, cleared. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Trump's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services, was at Mar-a-Lago last night for the America First Policy Institute Gala. While touting his election victory, the president-elect gave a shout-out to Kennedy, who is under scrutiny for his criticism of vaccines.
Don't get too popular, Bobby. Oh. You know, you've reached about the level. Now, we want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you, and boy, does he feel it in his heart.
Let's bring in CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, who is covering the transition from West Palm Beach. Olivia, sort of interesting comment there. We know that Trump doesn't like anyone overshadowing his spotlight, but let's go ahead and start with Governor Burgum. He's been a staunch ally in recent months. What can you tell us about him, and how are Republican lawmakers reacting to his selection?
Yeah, good to be with you. Burgum is the two-time governor of North Dakota, who you mentioned ran against President Trump for the Republican primary, but then subsequently dropped out, endorsed him, has been a close ally, and even someone that was considered to potentially be vice president. Last night, Trump making a little bit of a surprise announcement at Mar-a-Lago, announcing him for Secretary of the Interior. Now, in that role, he would oversee federal lands across the U.S., and we know that Trump has talked about increasing oil and drilling permits across the U.S., even using federal lands for that. His nomination, or rather Trump's intention to nominate him, was met very positively on Capitol Hill, with senators, Republican senators, applauding the nomination and the pick and saying that he would be a welcome person for that. Senator Barrasso of Wyoming saying he recognizes how important federal lands are for energy and mineral production. So it seems like he might have a little bit of an easier time getting through that Senate confirmation than perhaps some of other Trump's picks.
Represented Trump in multiple criminal indictments, including one in which he was convicted, the so-called hush money trial. What do we know about their relationship, why Trump tapped him for Deputy Attorney General, and what he will be responsible for?
I think it shows a reliance of Trump on his inner circle, and particularly his defense lawyers and his team of lawyers that have been shepherding him through these several trials that he's been involved in. We know that Todd Blanche was the lead defense attorney in that criminal hush money trial in New York, but he also represented Trump in the federal documents case that was unfolding here in Florida. So it shows that reliance he has on his lawyers, but he was tapped for Deputy Attorney General. That's a role that will need to be confirmed through the Senate. But in that role, they're essentially doing all the day-to-day work that's going on at the Department of Justice. So they're overseeing budgets, personnel, staff, and really implementing those key initiatives. So Trump entrusting someone who he's worked with before very closely, especially over the last year and a half, into that role, really indicative of how he sees the government, who he wants to install, perhaps loyalists into these positions.
What other picks has Trump made today?
We've heard about Stephen Chung being tapped to be communications director. He was communications director of the campaign, a bit of a firebrand, one to throw punches back on X. So an interesting announcement there, an important announcement there, as they start to really firm up some of the other departments, not only the cabinet, but what communications out of the White House are going to look like. We're still waiting to hear who would be press secretary. Of course, press secretary would be someone who's interacting with the press every day, especially in the briefing room. So very, very important pick who that will be. But we know that Chung, who has been serving as communications director, will continue on through into the White House.
Let's turn to Peter Hegseth. What more do we know about the investigation into him over alleged sexual assault, and how is the campaign responding?
Yeah, this was breaking news last night. The officials confirming to CBS News that Hegseth was involved in an altercation that they investigated as sexual misconduct or assault back in 2017. He alleges that it was a consensual relationship that he had with this woman, but she was left with contusions, according to a police filing from that. The campaign not saying anything publicly about that besides defending Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, but Vanity Fair was first to break this news And they were the ones who reported that Susie Wiles, who's Trump's chief of staff or incoming chief of staff and his campaign manager, was notified about this on Wednesday. And this kind of speaks to how quickly this transition has been moving. Hegseth's name was first heard for Secretary of Defense when Trump announced it. Of sources we had all been speaking to from CBS News into the Trump transition team, no one had mentioned Hegseth until Trump announced it. So showing how quickly this is moving, but these people also need to go through a vetting process through Senate confirmation. Of course, they won't have to if Trump starts doing recess appointments. So a lot unfolding there and a lot that we're following closely.
Former Vice President Mike Pence is urging GOP lawmakers to reject RFK Jr.'s planned nomination to head the Department of Health and Human Services. Why is he speaking out against RFK Jr., and will his opinion sway Republicans on the Hill?
A bit of a surprising announcement today from Trump's first and former vice president, Mike Pence. He's been very quiet throughout this entire process, besides saying that he would not support second Trump administration. But today, urging Republicans to reject Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for his stance on abortion. Now, that is very, very interesting and very key. Pence, in his statement, pointed out that RFK Jr. Defended abortion for most. Defended abortion, I should say, and taking a stance on it that was more in line a little bit with Democrats, saying that there's a little bit of flexibility into the later months of abortion. So interesting there, and he's calling on Republicans to really reconsider that. Part of the statement, he said that it would be an abrupt departure of the pro-life record of the first Trump administration. And of course, we know that administration was key in putting Supreme Court justices on the court that would then overturn Roe versus Wade. So a lot of development there. Interesting that he's coming out and saying this, but I will say I would be interested to see whether or not Republicans listen to him. It seems like lately Trump has had a tighter grip on the party. People are more willing to follow where he's leading the party, where RFK Jr. would be leading the party as well. And I don't know that Mike Pence's words will really resonate on Capitol Hill.
Olivia Rinaldi, thank you.